Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. As you all know, this season we are being sponsored by Kia UK. Kia's brand is all about movement that inspires and looking to the future. Kia is fast becoming a leader in electrification with their many award-winning electrical cars. The Kia EV6 is a fully electric crossover that boasts leading-edge technology and has a huge range of up to 328 miles. If you want to find out more about this amazing electrifying range, then visit the link we'll leave in the description. I'm Yas Rana, and to look back at another all-time classic of an Ashes Test match is Mel Farrell and Ben Gardner. But first, let's head to Mark Butcher to hear his thoughts on the game. Butch, that was one hell of a Test match. Ben Stokes became the second Englishman to score a fourth innings Ashes 150 after someone else. I can't remember who the other person was. Why do you think Stokes can do those innings and others just can't? And he's done it quite a few times now.
Yeah. I mean, what do we got? We've got two World Cup finals, heading the 2019, and then almost yesterday. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, he's a very different animal to most other people. You know, he'll kind of, it's almost as though the situation has to be lost before his best stuff comes out. And I don't know, I don't know what that is, what that says about his makeup and his psychology. But I mean, he's an absolute titan, isn't he? In that situation, I had the opportunity to interview. Well, not interview. I sort of was in an interview with Jos Buttler on the TV during the Rained Off Roses match on Friday. And I made a point of asking him about that when he was looking at players. How does it? Because I thought that Jos in his younger days, what stood out about him most was how brilliant he was, how ice cold he was in exactly the same sort of situation. I said, how do you see that in other players? And we ran out of time because what I was getting at was obviously going to be talking about whether he'd want Ben to come back for the 50 over World Cup, but we got cut off, and I didn't get to ask him that question. Because that's entirely it, isn't it? His makeup, his mentality is kind of like that. He is more turned on by that sort of situation, by the sort of situation that makes most people wilt, than he is about the mundanity of having to score first innings runs to set a game up. And what that says about him is for the psychologist to tell you. But it's certainly compelling. And one thing that it's done, that along with another incident, we might talk about it, I don't know, has sort of overshadowed what was a pretty limp performance from his team throughout the course of the Test match, really. So that and the other incident, or there's two incidents, weren't there? But the incident have kind of meant that the conversation around England's bowling in great conditions on day one, their batting in great conditions on day two, has all been overshadowed by what happened on the last two days of the game.
I like a stat. I think the most misleading stat in the world might be that Stokes averages 36 with the bat against Australia. That just doesn't tell you anything.
None of his numbers do they? I mean, they're kind of, his numbers are very sort of unremarkable, but the things that he does, the moments that he steals, are utterly remarkable.
You talked about England being limp on a few occasions. The batting collapse on day two, when batting conditions were very good and Lyon's gone off the field. We covered that on one of the daily podcasts. I just wanted to ask you about how you thought England bowled on day one. Conditions were as good for bowling as they were at any point, not just in the match really, but the series. And England were fine. They weren't bad, but they weren't great either. And that was kind of a passage of play. You feel that if Australia had that opportunity, they wouldn't have let it slip in the same way that England did.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, when you put a team in and they get 416, that's not what you were after, is it? Let's be honest. They just seem to lack a bit of an edge, really. It was just, I mean, and I don't mean that in terms of getting in Australia's face. It just kind of weren't, that the ball wasn't doing anything at enough pace to cause anybody any problems, and that's an issue. It's going to be, and it was a stark issue when Australia when they came out to bowl, or when they decided to go to the short ball ploy, which just looked infinitely more dangerous. We might have a chat about that short ball thing as well, if you'll forgive me. But yeah, so to concede 400 and then concede a lead of 90, having been 180 odd for one, was just bad cricket, really. And I kind of got fed up with fielding messages from people on socials around about, well, if you praise them when they do it great, then you kind of got to go with it when they mess it up. And I was thinking to myself, I watched and commentated on the Test matches last summer. And not at any point did England seeing a moment or finding a moment in the game whereby they might have to temper their approach or have to put their foot down. They never missed in terms of their judgment in when to do it. And their judgment in the way that they played that situation on day 2 was really, really bad. Bazball or no Bazball, it was really bad. And it left them vulnerable to losing the Test match pretty much.
I think Stokes, after the game, sort of inadvertently articulated perfectly what the flaw in his kind of mindset is. So he was asked specifically about that collapse in the first innings, and he said what he's trying to do is try to enable people to be in situations where they have no other thoughts in their heads, so that they are able to do what they think is best for them, and there are no other. They don't start second guessing themselves at all. Sounds great, but what happens if someone doesn't know what's best for them? Isn't like the entirety of the game's history, we've had coaches and captains intervening when people more qualified than young players intervene and say, actually, you do just need to change the way you're going about things a little bit. So I thought it was interesting during this Test match that Duckett, a guy who's in his late 20s, he's got 20 or so first-class hundreds. He's done really well in different conditions recently. He has an excellent Test match.
He's been superb, actually. Yeah,
he's been brilliant.
I've been pleasantly surprised at how good he has been.
And then Stokes and I think Bairstow look like they're pretty set in terms of how they want to go about things. Same with Root, but maybe some of the younger players in Crawley, Pope, and Brook, who've all at various points in the series got runs, actually might not have the same clarity as some of the older guys. And I wonder if actually there needs to be a little bit more intervention from the guys at the top.
Well, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense for the team to have a commonality in the way that they want to encourage people to play and express themselves, whatever that means. But I think that's absolutely fine. But I think an overarching strategy ought to be, you know what, if we get these guys with all the men back on boundary and we can tick along at 4 or 5 and over without having to slog it up in the air, then let's do that. Wait for them to bring the field in, and then we'll smash them again. That's not telling people, that's not taking away people's sort of unalienable right to hit sixes. That's just playing cricket smart. And like I said, I think they did that throughout the course of last summer, which was fantastic, barring the one game at Lord's. And I see no reason as to why that shouldn't be the case again this year against a really dangerous opposition. I mean, it's the other thing that you have to take into account is that Australia are the best team in the world. And that ends the conversation. So you're unlikely to be able to push them around or for want of a better phrase, take the piss out of them in the way that you might be other teams. So sometimes you have to push and pull a little bit. And I still don't see that as sort of like trampling on anybody's individual expression. It's just playing the game,
I'm afraid I've got to ask you about the Jonny Bairstow, Alex Carey stumping. You've done a tweet that's gone viral this morning that was sort of in relation to it. You basically think it was fine.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to it on the radio, and it was Ali Mitchell actually. She swapped over. Jonathan Agnew was on lead commentary when it happened, and Aggers sort of got all flustered and didn't quite know what to say about it. And Ali Mitchell came on, and I was trying to, because nobody had really described what had happened apart from this is audio. And Ali Mitchell said, "Well, Alex Carey took the ball and immediately threw the stumps down." And I thought, okay, well that sounds like it's out to me. So I got on the phone to call my old man who I knew would be watching. I said, "Just tell me what happened. Just walk me through it." And he walked me through it. And I said, "So that's out then, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah." And that was pretty much it. That was the conversation. And then when I eventually got to Taunton, I was driving down there for a Blast game and watched it, saw it on a clip on socials on 2 different angles, and I'm just thinking to myself, that's just out. In all the time that I played, right, and it was instinctive thing to do. If I was going to wander up the crease to go and do some gardening or whatever it might be, I would instinctively turn around to the keeper or if I'd knocked it to cover or whatever, I'd make sure I'd got eye contact, nodded, is it okay, and then move, right? It was just something that I always did. I never even thought about it, because in the same way that I was taught as a kid, when you're taking a catch, don't put the ball on the floor. I was taught to make sure that the ball was dead or that the fielders were happy for you to leave your ground before you left your ground. And so for me, it's just as plain as day out. And pretty much to all of the other professional cricketers that I have spoken to, they all say exactly the same thing. What was he doing? Where was he going? Why didn't he make sure that he knew where the ball was and what was going on before he left? And of course, now we've got an international incident. We got Jonny Farquhar or whatever his name is getting banned from the MCC. We've got people saying they're not going to have a beer with each other after the game, and what's worse, people who have definitely done worse things being holier than thou on social media, saying how awful the whole thing is and how you would never have done anything like it. Nonsense.
Ignoring Twitter, what did you make of the reaction of Stokes and McCullum? Because they could very easily have just said what you said and just said it was out. And sorry, worth clarifying, they both said it was out, but Stokes and McCullum both said that they would have revoked the appeal had the shoe been on the other foot.
Well, I mean, I don't think they can say that, either of them.
Because they weren't in that position.
Because they weren't in that situation.
Mm.
They cannot possibly know how they would have reacted in that situation. They can't. You can say that everyone can say that I'd go back into the burning building to save the bloke next door. You can say that, but whether you would actually do it, you don't know. Unless you are actually in that situation, you have no idea what you would have done in that situation. And Cummins' interview at the end of it was more interesting for me because he said, and I think he was being completely genuine. He said we'd watched him do it a couple of times before. Alex threw the stumps down. We all thought that it was absolutely kosher and fine, and we didn't give it. We didn't think for a second that there was any reason to recount the appeal. It is not up to any players on the field. I go back, and this is one of my favourite ones, is the Ian Bell India thing at Trent Bridge. It is not up to the player to call time on tee. It is not up to the player to decide when it is over. It is not up to the player to decide when the ball is dead. You make sure your responsibility that the ball is not live before you go wandering out of your crease. It's pretty damn simple.
Nick asks, where do we go from here with the short pitch stuff? If it becomes a legit tactic for 60 out of 70 overs, people are going to switch off. It's mostly pretty dull. We lose 90% of the shots, but the bowlers are showing it's sustainable for longer than we expected, and it gets wickets. I think it's a great question. I think there were quite a few things going on here. You didn't have a frontline spinner for the majority of the game over both sides. The pitch was unusually slow, but I guess almost worrying from a tactical perspective, I think what both teams did is they went all in on the tactic in a way that you've not really seen before. So England literally didn't bowl a full ball for 3 hours on day 4. Both teams had, sometimes teams go to the short ball and you've got 2 men back deep and that's kind of it. But this is the entire field.
Everybody's on the leg side.
Exactly. What did you make of it?
It's leg theory, isn't it? By any other name. It's the laws of the game were changed after the Bodyline series. The laws of the game were also changed when the West Indies were the dominant force in world cricket, in order to stop them from intimidating batters by bowling too many deliveries at people's heads. Having said that, and again, I don't know. The West Indies took real umbrage to that because they felt that they were being unfairly persecuted. And I don't ever remember seeing Malcolm Marshall and Joel and Mikey bowling to those types of fields. They would always have 3 slips of gully, short leg, 1 man back, or maybe 2 men back. And the whole game was changed because of that. And now everyone's kind of going, is quite happy to have everybody on the leg side no attempt to bowl the ball at stumps whatsoever, and I really don't like it. I know the worst thing about it is that it's very successful, and you can understand why, because in order to score any runs, you've got to take this risk on with all the fielders over there. And if the boundary's big enough or whatever, then it's a really big risk to try to take that on all the time to score. So it's going to be successful. It's going to work. For me, it is the biggest advertisement for quality spin bowling that I've ever seen, because it's just so dull. So I don't know. I don't, because what about intimidatory bowling? I mean, that seems to have disappeared. I remember Alex Tudor once getting warned by, I think it might have been umpire Alan Jones. We're playing on a quick bouncy one at Northampton, and Alex Tudor is bowling Rob Bailey, former England batter. I think he was batting at 3 for Northampton at the time, and Tudor's just bowling this wicked spell where the ball is just whistling past his neck, back of a length, bounce, all that kind of stuff. And after about 2 or 3 overs of this, and of Tudes really sort of hurrying him up and all the rest of it, well, not 2 or 3, it wasn't even that long. It was probably about an over and a half. I think I was captain, and the umpire sort of gave Tudes a warning about intimidatory bowling, and I blew my stack. It was kind of like we had slips, we had gullies. It was perfectly legitimate, quick bowler bowling to top order batter. But we've had through the course of the Test match for both teams bowling at 9, 10, and Jack, with everybody on the leg side bowling at their heads the whole time. What the hell's that?
I mean, I think part of it was how lenient the umpiring was at the start of the ploy. I think they were really, really slow to call not only overhead wides, but also calling one for the over when it's above shoulder height. I think they got slightly better as the test progressed, but I do think they could have been harsh on that. I mean, you talk about how potentially being called for the bowling being too intimidating. The England bouncers weren't at 90 miles per hour. They were between 77 and 81, with the exception of Josh Tongue. Final question, Butch. Changes for Headingley. Jimmy didn't have a great test. He didn't bowl badly again, but Mark Wood is in the squad, so you'd think he's fit. If Wood's fit, and with how well Tongue bowled, how do you get Wood in the side?
Well, I think one of Jimmy or Stewart has to miss out. Probably Jimmy. Keeper up. He's just not looked himself. And obviously the squad hasn't changed, has it? So you've still got Mo there. Should they want a spinner? I would imagine some of the Headingley pitches have turned quite a bit. That they would want to have a specialist spinner in the side. Obviously with the squad being what it is, there's no place for somebody on the outside of that, Dawson or Ray Allen, who spent most of the game on the field. Ollie Pope's shoulder, is that an issue? I mean, he didn't field, did he, throughout most of the Test match? And so Dan Lawrence is the sort of the spare batter. Is there a case for shifting things around a little bit if Popey can't make it, and perhaps having Ben go up to number 3? I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think one of the things is that because of the calls that they've made from the start of the Test match series, it is unlikely to wildly differ. At some point, one of the frontline bowlers was going to have to be rested because of the back-to-back tests. I mean, it's going to be brutal on both sets of bowling attacks that last Test match, just given how many short balls they all bowled. So I would expect at least one change in both sides in terms of the seamers. Australia, I think, would be keen to get their spin bowler in, Murphy in instead of Nathan Lyon. I mean, that's a huge blow for them not to have him, but I think for them, they would much rather have that variety. And for us, if Mo's fit, then I think he comes back and plays. Again, a huge risk, because with injuries of that nature, they can come back again if he has to do a lot of work. So England don't have many options really, but I think Wood will play, and I think Jimmy might be the one to sit out.
Well, just a 3-day gap between Test matches. Chase your time, Butch. Catch you soon.
No problem.
For this episode, Kia's Movement That Inspires moment, Kia is giving you the chance to watch the highly anticipated Ashes match against Australia at the Kia Oval on July the 30th. Not only will you be able to attend day 4 of the test, but you can also watch it from the luxury of the Kia box for a chance to win a pair of tickets. All you need to do is enter by heading to the link in the description. Mel, first off, have you recovered?
No, I haven't recovered. I'm a blithering mess. And just hearing you talk about the final test here at the over. See, I can't speak. I don't know how I'm going to get to the Oval. This series so far has just been emotionally, physically, spiritually exhausting on every level. God knows how the players do it. I'm just watching. It's done me in. It was incredible. Very different, of course, to Edgbaston. I feel like there was a lovely warm glow after Edgbaston where it was all, gosh, that was great cricket and it was so close and everyone was kind of happy. And now the fuse has been lit and it has exploded after Lords. And wow, I was thinking about it. I've just covered some incredible series. I think about that Border Gavaskar series in Australia when India won, probably the second time, which I thought, God, that's it was one of the greatest series, if not the greatest series I've ever covered. But there really is something about Ashes that just produces something utterly ridiculous, and that is where we are now. This is crazy, this series.
Edgbaston was exhausting in quite a rational way. Just when England batting, I remember we were talking about it, that because England bat so quickly, you literally do just pack in a day and a half in a day, or even 2 days in a day maybe. Whereas this one there was just so much going on that final day, and it's kind of quite hard to get your head around. And you say there's something different about Ashes cricket. That final day, I think for the first time in the series, felt, you know what, this has got the needle of the great series have. You think back to 2005, the cricket was great, but one of the first things an English fan will remember is Ricky Ponting walking off the field, giving it all that to the England dressing room. And we'll get into the rights and wrongs of everything from the player behaviour to the fans' behaviour. But from an overall spectacle, I think it has elevated a notch.
A notch? Are you
Several
kidding?
notches.
It's elevated, all right. Yeah, and yeah, it has. And I mean, when you've got a good old moral debate, the moral Ashes running alongside the actual Ashes and who's one up in all of that, then that absolutely adds another dimension to it. And for me, when you talk about everything that happened, but I thought back, it was genuinely must have been 5 million years ago that Jonny Bairstow carried off that the protester. But I was looking back, oh yeah, Steve Smith scored a century, didn't he? Like, all these things seem to have all been forgotten in what happened. But what it has done as well, it did in the final day. It's going to be fascinating for me to see how that might play out of the rest of the series. It was released Ben Stokes beast mode in unbelievable ways. It was genuinely the stumping of Jonny Bairstow released the Kraken, and it was glorious to watch. It didn't, of course, quite become the miracle of Lords as it was a miracle of Headingley, but it only enhances, I think, the legend that is Ben Stokes. I don't know any other player like him who can do things like that, who could almost, it seems like, bend the will of the elements, and everything focuses on him and what he can do. It was quite incredible to watch, really. Can't believe I've been lucky enough to be there for a number of these amazing moments when he does this under the most intense pressure as well. So all of that now, everything that happened on the last day of an incredibly eventful test will undoubtedly be the narrative going forwards. But is the Kraken released, and is that enough to get England back into this series very quickly?
Who knows? But just on Stokes' innings, Ben, I said it on the Daily Pod, but there was something quite special about it being at the setting of one of his 2019 miracles in a similar scenario to the other 2019 miracle, a more extreme example. And this was a combination of the two, and had he pulled it off, it would have been the one that topped them all, I think. Why do you think Stokes is capable of those innings more often than anyone else?
Yeah, well, it's so odd, isn't it? Because actually, before this game, I reckon one of the great frustrations, or the main great frustration of Bazball has been that Stokes has been the one kind of unable to thrive under it as a cricketer, I guess. As much as he's driven it as a captain, and yet you kind of still got the sense that like it was fine for him to go and chuck it away if England were, 304 or whatever, as long as he could still do these things. And we had signs that was the case. We had the South Africa 100 last year after they lost that one game that summer. That was obviously, it was nowhere near as ridiculous as this, but that was Stokes being like, oh, okay, there's now a bit more importance to what I do, so I'm going to do it properly. And maybe that's just how he needs to do it in terms of conserving his own, not his physical fitness, but his mental energy, basically. If like obviously it would be great if Stokes played like that all the time, but like that's
asking a lot in fairness.
Exactly, that's surely impossible. And if absolutely fine for Stokes to do that, like at the points when England most need it. I think England would quite happily take that. I guess also, look, Stokes, and you're seeing this, through everything that England are doing, and they still deserve lots of credit for everything that's happened, even though they're 2-0 down in Ashes series. So we'll get more onto that. But what a lot of that highlights is that Stokes is he's super smart, basically. And I mean, smart maybe in some kind of unconventional ways, but like he's really instinctively or, calculatedly or however, managed to find ways to, motivate cricketers and get the best out of cricketers who previously were, severely underperforming or like a hugely low ebb. That's obviously that is a brilliant thing he has done. And there was huge cricketing intelligence in that. And we've seen him have cricket intelligence at so many points in his England captaincy and through his England career. And I think if you're contrasting it to that first innings when England, the stick was that they got was fair enough for that, how they collapsed in that innings. And obviously it was bad. I'm not saying it wasn't bad. Equally, there are two things, which is one was that I think at the time, people didn't quite acknowledge how difficult a problem that was to solve. Like, what do you do when a team bowls loads of bounces at you and puts loads of men out on the hook and has like a field completely set for that? What is the right way to approach that? Because we saw in Australia's innings what they did. They did what England fans kind of wanted England to do and lost 128 for 8 or whatever it was, going at like 2 and over. So clearly you can't. It's also not valid, especially with how England play, but in general, to just ride it out, that wouldn't have worked. So it was a pretty tricky challenge to figure out how you do play that short ball, and Ben Stokes did it absolutely brilliantly. What?
I thought Ben Duckett did as well. I thought their batting on that final morning, that first hour, was fantastic. I thought it was really, really good. The way that they found ways to negotiate that bowling safely while still scoring. And they did play lots of hook shots, a lot of controlled hook shots. And I don't know, I thought that was really impressive. And
managing it with the conditions as well, right? What was the stat about him scoring from different ends, Stokes? So
basically
when he went off.
From when Bairstow was out, and we'll get to the Bairstow dismissal, don't worry. He struck at well over 100 from batting from the pavilion end. So the leg side boundary for him was slightly shorter, but crucially downhill and downwind.
Yeah.
And he was striking it well below 50 from the nursery end.
And that's a brilliant piece of cricketing smartness. And I guess,
but also for Cummins as well, it must be said. So there was a moment when Stokes hit Stark for 2 sixes after lunch, and England is still scoring really quickly. You have the leadership group come together and have a chat, and quite a long chat, noticeably long to have that many people involved when it's not a drinks break or whatever. And Cummins was asked after the game, what did you guys talk about? And they basically said, let's make scoring to that side of the ground as hard as possible, no matter what end Stokes is at. And it did really work for 45 or so minutes before Stokes got out. The run scoring really, really dried up. And I know the chat is, from our point of view, all about England and Stokes at the moment. But again, Australia just get their head down and do the basics better than any other cricket team in the world at the moment. And they kept their cool, I thought. Mel, I thought it was really impressive again from Pat Cummins across the Test match. Yeah,
and because, there's no denying that the ghosts of Headingley, they had the living ghost. He's still very much there, but that the memories of that, they're most, I think all of them would say, their most heartbreaking loss in Test cricket that they would have experienced in that match. And it was all the little fine margins and tiny moments that on that last day at Headingley that they just didn't execute. It was almost like you just have to execute one play and it's done. And when Smith dropped the catch, it was like, oh gosh, it's Marcus Harris in the form of Smith, and he doesn't normally drop that. It was like Nathan Lyon missing the run out at Headingley. It shows you just what pressure does to even the absolute very best players. They do things that they don't normally do. But there was a little bit more calm. At one point, I remember yelling out, "Oh my God, how many reviews do Australia have?" Because I was having flashbacks.
They had all three?
They had all three. I was going back to, flashbacks to Headingley. So there was no getting away from memories of that. But they did manage to keep their cool. They knew, again, it was just going to be the execution of one play, and then it was going to be over. And that there was a measuredness that wasn't there at Headingley. And maybe that measured thinking wouldn't have been there if they hadn't been through Headingley, because they knew what had happened last time and what they did wrong. And they did slow that down, and they did stop him from scoring so frequently there. So, maybe this, you need to give some credit to what happened at Headingley and what they learned from that loss in how they ended up being able to affect a win here at Lords.
But I think it's also just huge credit to Cummins as well. I think that the other big difference Headingley, one is that they've been through it. The other is that both leadership has changed in terms of captain and coach. And I think that Langer and Payne were both like well matched, and actually like I think they were both quite hotheads basically, like especially in those kind of situations. And that was noticeable in both tests so far, that's not been the case. And actually I've said this stat on the pod before, but I think it is quite illustrative, is that going back to 2016, before this series, Australia hadn't won a single test by fewer than 100 runs or with fewer than 6 wickets in hand, I think it is. And that's
how they've won 2 close tests.
Exactly, in a row. And that was the big thing that was stopping them from winning away series. Also mean they were getting beat at home sometimes, despite the fact they were demolishing teams sometimes. The close games they weren't winning, and now they've done 2 in a row. And presumably, given the way this series has gone, the games are only going to get closer and closer. And Australia now also have just that reassurance. They have done it in those situations. Half an hour from the end of both games, right, England were pretty much favourites. Would that be fair to say?
I never thought England were favourites yesterday.
Okay.
I know
there's still a lot of runs to get.
I know that WinViz was saying that England were favourites, but I think as you saw from England's tail, I was like, they're not going to get 20 between them, or they're doing well to get 20 between them. Mm-hmm. So I at no point did I think England were favourites yesterday. We've got to talk about it. The biggest moment yesterday was that Bairstow Carey stumping. We've had loads of really nuanced emails on this, and unfortunately we can't really read all of them out. But the gist of the emails is essentially like questioning when does a ball become dead, pointing out, kind of as Stokes did, that it's slightly different at the end of an over to someone just standing outside of their crease.
It's really different, right? Can I just
okay.
That's
what Stokes said. And by the way, Stokes said it's out.
Yes.
But he did say it is different if it's the end of an over rather than balls 1 to 5.
Yeah, I think so. It's it is out. I think it would also have been reasonable, although maybe slightly, like, I think there's more justification for the decision the umpires made than doing it not out, but the umpires could have concluded the ball was dead.
So you think if the ball had been called dead, it wouldn't have been the wrong decision?
I think both decisions would have been reasonable. I think that the ball finally settled in the keeper's hand. The umpires have leeway in doing that, and it would be reasonable to say if a player has left the ball and it is in the keeper's hands, that means it's finally settled. Especially, but the decision itself, I don't have an issue with. The other thing that's different as well to some of the other situations that people are sort of raising in comparison, say there's a folk stumping of Balburney that's been going around a lot, or Pope running out to Grand Tom, is that the reason why Bairstow was run out in this case is because he thinks the ball is dead. That's different to someone who doesn't know where the ball is, like wondering if they can take a run, or to a guy overbalancing when he's sort of like still in his crease. Those things they're just different. They're not analogous. You might think one is right and one is wrong, and that's fine. But then and I also think Carey isn't throwing the ball in the hope that Bairstow thinks it's dead as well. That would be sort of pretty sharp practice. He's throwing it because he thinks Bairstow might be out of his ground.
He could not have thrown the ball quicker.
Yes, that
in the same way that when a batter is stumped off a spinner, the keeper
Well,
whips
that
off
was
the
my
bails
point.
as soon as possible.
Yeah, you can't have a different law for spinners and pace bowlers. So it can't be different, and you probably wouldn't have as much sympathy for a batter if it had happened to spin bowling, the keeper was up. Right, I don't think that would have been nearly as controversial because we're so used to seeing that kind of thing, and you can't. I don't see how you can have a different law, even if it is. I get the thing about the end of the over, but with the ball settling in the keeper's hands, you can't differentiate. I think between spin and pace. No one, even Ben Stokes, no one's actually disputing that it's out. Right.
Yeah.
No one's actually.
I've not seen
disputing that,
anyone really say that. Yeah.
And, there's some irony, and that this is it. And I get it. It's partly because it's Ashes, because emotions are high and people care, which is a great thing. But it is a little ironic that I find people care so much about the letter of the law. In one way, when Mitch Starc grasses a catch, and then the next day, the same people are not so worried about the letter of the law, more worried about the spirit of cricket, and it just suddenly flips because a lot of it depends on who you're supporting, and that's the passion of fans and how much people care about that.
Sports fans are just hypocrites, right?
Oh yeah,
I mean, I basically think they were both. The decisions in both with the Starc non-catch and the Bairstow stumping were both correct. Like the laws, especially I think probably more so for the Starc one, are quite clear. And yeah, I mean, it was interesting how much it riled people up. And I think in defence of the umpires and in defence of Australia, Atherton and Strauss, two former England captains, straight away just said it was dozy, didn't contest it. And I guess it is dozy from Bairstow to assume the ball is dead that quickly. Mm-hmm. That is a mistake. Yeah. And he has been punished for that mistake.
I think the thing that's perfect about this is there's so many things that are kind of all true and people on either side aren't acknowledging the things on the other side that are true. Yeah. It is dozy from Bairstow. Yes. Bairstow has run out because he thinks the ball is dead. Yes. Carey has not taken that knowledge into effect when he tried to run him out. Yes. Therefore there is a slight quibble around if you want to talk about it's like, okay, taking a different comparison where a team chose to withdraw the appeal, the Bell-Dhoni run out in 2011, I think in that case there was even less reason for India to withdraw the appeal than in this case, because that ball just definitely wasn't dead because it hadn't gone to the boundary. In this case, there is an argument that I think Bairstow was more justified thinking the ball was dead, even though the umpire still made the right decision, I guess. And people weren't saying it was a disgrace for India to withdraw that appeal, I don't think.
We got a question from Louis who asked, what would you all advise your captains to do in that situation? I think, Mel, pretty clear that you'd do what Australia did. I would be the same.
How do you think it would go down in a club game?
It's completely different in a club game because there are things you can't check in a club game. Mm-hmm. So you can't check so for example, whether the umpire has called over or not. That is something that's impossible to check in a club game.
But the umpires would know though if they. But
I mean, on my own team, our wicketkeeper tries that all the time. Mm-hmm. All the time. I've actually got a wicket like that before, so I'm not complaining. Okay. Would you?
I could see that sort of dismissal causing a bit of. I mean, it's called umbrage in a test game. So I could see someone, and I guess this is the thing. Similar actually to Robinson's sledging of Khawaja, and people make the point that he's going to have to back it up with wickets now. Carey's had a good series with the gloves.
I think Carey's been brilliant.
He's been brilliant with the gloves. Been brilliant with the bat. But he's going to have to maintain that because. I think there was a certain element of sheepishness you could see from him in particular in the way that, Broad, I think, felt a little bit like he was maybe getting slightly under his skin. Carey was like, because Broad was asking him, right, is the ball dead or not? Which Broad was obviously being, facetious, annoying and asking. Also, Carey kind of has to answer that question now, right? Like, and Carey wasn't doing that. He didn't really have the responses there. If Carey now doesn't continue to have a brilliant series, then people will look back on this, I suppose, similar to Robinson, I think. Do you think?
I think people are going to bring this up for years in the same way people bring up Broad not walking for years. I don't think how Carey does for the rest of the series really affects that.
Of course it won't.
People, yeah, exactly.
Can I just say, like, just so that people know that we do read the emails as well, and I know we don't have time to go through them, but I did think there was a really interesting one that you forwarded me from James Tapper, just talking about how difficult, or his frustration with the dead ball rule, and knowing and trying to teach kids when the ball's live and when it's dead. So you've made me think a lot about things, James Tapper, out there. I'm going to actually take your email to Fraser Stewart at the MCC and ask him about that, because like I do whenever there's something I'm not sure about and I need to understand why the law is why it is. So that's because it's a vague enough thing in that there's some vagueness around it, right? Or not vagueness around the actual law, but when something isn't marked by a line or it's not the stumps or whatever it is, it's an interpretation that both teams have to consider the ball dead, and the umpire's satisfied. Both teams thinks the ball is dead. That's enough vagueness that makes it more difficult, I think. So
yeah, I'm pretty defensive of the laws in most cases, and in this
Ben
one
thinks
as well.
the laws are the greatest piece of writing ever.
Well, no,
put
I definitely think there are certain things you can problem, but I think my main frustration is when people criticise the laws because something isn't sort of like, there are always going to be edge cases and borderline cases with anything. There wouldn't be a way to make the laws, I think, or you could make the laws to have the Steve Smith catch be definitely out or definitely not out, say in the first innings, but there wouldn't be a way to make the laws so that every single catch was uncontroversial. That's just impossible. And probably, I mean, maybe you could say that the ball is only dead, like, or the umpires have to say the ball is dead, and until that point, you know, everything is fair. Maybe that is something that could be added, I suppose.
Hey, calm down. I just want you to know I'm not having a go at the laws either. I have many of these discussions with Fraser, and they do change them when incidents come up that they feel, okay, there's some ambiguity there, because there are some things, and the catching thing about that's more about like those laws are almost designed for there being no grass, because there's not one line there. There are things that by their nature are ambiguous because they just are. But then what happens with this, of course, is that you have that added completely ambiguous and open to interpretation so-called spirit of cricket, which I know a lot of people think is nonsense. A lot of people feel very strongly about it, but at least the laws are there, and they are the laws. So unlike the spirit of cricket, which means whatever you want it to mean, basically.
I just, whilst we're talking about Carey, a piece of absolute brilliance on the final day from him for the wicket of Ben Duckett. I don't know if people would have seen this, but replays basically showed that he'd moved his starting position considerably for that ball. So it ends up going, he's basically standing where he would be standing if it was a right-handed batter, and the ball goes directly to him, and he probably doesn't get the ball had he been standing in his conventional spot. So
I didn't realize, so it was for the ball itself.
It was only that ball.
Wow,
and
that is
Sky,
amazing.
Sky
It's much
looked
better
back
than it was, yeah.
at like what was potentially said between Hazelwood and Carey. Absolutely nothing. So maybe it was a plan they concocted before the over that he does that for the fourth ball or whatever. But yeah, there wasn't any communication between
maybe like
Carey and anyone else.
Baseball-esque catching signals.
We got an email in from another James. He says, I enjoyed having my email read out so much last week that I decided to give it another shot. I'm currently training for an ultra marathon, so that was just the boost I needed on my run. If we move past the mostly bizarre opinions on the Bairstow stumpings, the real question for me is, does the pod think that England now actually have a greater chance of winning the series than before this match? I know this sounds odd, but this is my thinking. Number one, there will be no Nathan Lyon, who has a strange hold on English batters for over a decade. 2, there will be an even more pissed off Bairstow with a point to prove. 3, it will possibly be a fresh England attack. I reckon we could see Moeen and Wood come in for Anderson and Robinson versus a tired Australian attack. They'll be playing their 4th game in a month. And 4, we will see the loudest crowds England has seen for a while. And 5, Ben Stokes. That man does not know when he is beaten. We'd love to hear the pod's thoughts on any of the above points. This Australia side is definitely decent, but I don't think it's quite as good as the statistics and pundits would have you believe. For me, 3-2 is well and truly on. Mel, what do you reckon?
So were you in the press conference yesterday with us? Yeah. When I asked Ben Stokes if this felt different to Edgbaston losing this match or if it was the same, and he gave the most extraordinary answer. That's when he said, "We're in the perfect position." And I was like, yeah, we've got them right where we want them. It was sort of like, it was amazing. And of course he's going to say that we can win. Actually, I've really hurt myself. I did that
really went for it.
Wow. It was extraordinary when he was saying we were in the perfect position for the way we play. And I know what he's saying. And he's got to say that as well, because he's not going to also go out there and say, yeah, no, we might win one, maybe two. If we're lucky, we can draw the series. So of course he's going to say that. And I guess that's what I referenced earlier, that have they released the Kraken and is that going to make a difference? It may well, the manner of this loss, without it being so nicey really like it was after Edgbaston, this might really focus England. They're not going to be going off playing golf at St Andrews in between these tests. It's a quick turnaround and they're straight into it. And I think they're going to be smarting in ways that they weren't smarting after Edgbaston. And he made the point that they have won series 3-0 before. So, they have a precedent if they look at it this way. I mean, I've given up predicting anything. It's hard. Australia have such a good bowling attack. They are a really good side. Now, it hasn't been flawless, their performance, but again, we'll probably have to go and say, gosh, look, what are the conditions like? Australia did, you'd have to say, probably have the worst of the conditions for the two sides. It really felt like every time they came out to bat, the clouds came over, and every time they came out to bowl, the sun broke through. So there is something in that. They managed to find their way through that. Without Nathan Lyon, he is a big loss for sure. I do think they have a lot in that bowling attack, though, with possibly others to come in if there are tired bodies that can still take 20 wickets, especially if they've got a decent off-spin bowler to hold up an end. But I don't think it's outside the realms of possibility that they could come back and win this 3-2. It's not. It's going to be really hard. But yeah, the focus is going to be really interesting for me for England if this really sharpens it, and I think it will.
I think this now I would make England favourites for this 3-match series they're about to play, if that makes sense. But I would expect them to probably take it 2-1. I think. I think they're not 3-0 better than Australia, even without Lyon and even with the miles and legs, and even now England are, properly focused or whatever. I think that Australia, at some point there'll be a collapse or a Dix innings from Smith or Head or something, and they'll be able to get one of them to get over the line. I just really hope that game is at the Oval, so that because at that point, if it's 2-2 going into the 5th test, then we, whatever happens there, it's basically one of the greatest test series of all time. If Australia win at Headingley, as good as these first 2 tests have been, it does become a bit of a damp squib going into the last 2 games, unfortunately.
And I think, Mel, you're absolutely right. I think it's important to really stress Australia won this test match without their lead spinner on the field for most of the game. They won this test match after being inserted to bat in conditions that felt like the first morning at Trent Bridge in 2015, first morning at Edgbaston in 2015, first morning at Headingley in 2019. That I know the pitch was flat, but it did a lot when the conditions were overcast and the ball was new, and it was both of those in that first morning, and England weren't really on it. And I feel like if you look at differences between the two sides, Australia don't let England go through moments like that. They're not really that passive when there is an opportunity to really attack with the ball, I think. Obviously, with the bat, England do their own thing. But, if you compare the two sides in that new ball spell in the second innings, that's what wins Australia the game, right? England are 48 for 4, chasing 371. It's ridiculous that England came within 43 runs of winning when only 2 guys get to 20, right? I guess that is one of the big differences between the sides.
Yeah. Can I ask Mel a question, actually? How keen will Australia be to make changes? Because as much as I agree that Nisa Say could come in and do a pretty good job, I get the feeling that Australia, if they think those guys can just about get through a game, they would pick them, whereas England would be almost more likely, I think, as they did with Wood in this test. They sort of basically saying, I think Wood might be fine to get through it, but let's give them one more week. Whereas I feel like Australia, they have their first choice team and they would only go away from that if they absolutely had to. And I wonder if that could hurt them when they actually give someone one game too many, if that makes sense.
I think they would go with their first choice. Absolutely. If they're all fit and they're all okay, then yeah, I can't imagine them going away from that. They were quite surprised by how much England went after Scott Boland at Edgbaston. I don't think they were expecting that. In fact, I know they weren't really expecting it. So, after having not picked Stark, going back to the so-called big three that have dominated and that Boland had pushed himself into by virtue of his wicket-taking ability in the tests he's had, I think that's a more comfortable bowling attack for Australia, having those 3 in there. So, it depends how they pull up. We saw a lot of bowlers bowling a lot of over short, but then again, because of the way England play, they didn't take advantage. That for me was a really key part of the match, really, when Lyon went off and all of a sudden you had 4 fast bowlers, and there was no thought at that point from England that here's a moment where we can actually take advantage. And the whole Bazball thing, it's not about just being aggressive. It's about working out, having game awareness and working out when are the moments to press, when are the moments to absorb. I thought that was a moment that England could have actually done some, not damage, but they could have really made inroads into the fitness and well-being of Australia's fast bowlers, and they didn't do that. They were too busy expressing themselves. Which I get the clarity message and everything else, but I think you can still have clarity while having game awareness and recognizing those moments. And that's just one thing. So I think Australia will go with them. I think they've got some good alternatives if they don't, but I can't see them not going with those 3 if they're fit, because if they win at Headingley, it doesn't matter what happens for the other 2 tests. They can bring in Nisa and Boland. Andrew McDonald can come out of retirement and bowl a few overs himself.
It's a mistake that England have made to go the other way around. England have been guilty of planning for test matches that are dead in the past. They're like, oh, make sure Wood's fit for the 5th test. Like, well, if it's 4-0 by then, it doesn't really matter, does it? Mel, you were there for all 5 days, but the most interesting, I guess, in terms of being at the ground would be day 5. Cricket is on the front pages, not just for the quality of the cricket, but also for the behaviour of some people at the ground. What did you make of the overall atmosphere after the Bairstow stumping, not just in the crowd, but obviously the scenes we saw in the long room afterwards?
Well, I've never heard anything like it at Lord's, and I spoke to other people who were there, who work there, and have been there for many, many more years than I have, and they've never heard anything like it either. But it was one thing from the crowd. I'm not a massive fan of booing and abuse normally. I don't care what team it is, whether it's in Australia or whether it's in England. That's just not my thing. But people do it, and that's fine. So don't really, have that much problem with that. The stuff in the long room I thought was disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful, and I don't see how anybody could excuse that, because you're so close to the players, and you think of security normally at grounds. Although I suppose we started off with a bit of a lapse in security with the protest in the way it started. But I think that's disgraceful to be up that close to players. And this is supposedly some, bastion of decorum and spirit of cricket and everything else. And in the end, they acted like a bunch of yobs. I thought it was disgraceful. And we've seen there's an investigation now. I understand passions are high, but if you're in a really privileged position to be that close to the players and get all of these privileges that, yes, you pay for, but especially in a week where we've seen so much talk about elitism in the English game as well, and then you have people who are upholders of the elite who want to keep, fight for the Eton Harrow game there. So all of these traditions and culture, and it just was mob mentality.
I think you're right to pick out privilege as a word. Like, there's almost a sense that the players are privileged to go through the long room. Like, no. Members of some private club are privileged to be that close to the players, and it's a total abuse of it. You don't get that proximity in other grounds. Like, I got sent. I've got a friend who's a playing member at the MCC, and he sent me a video of how close he was to Stokes and Broad at lunch. Like, they're just walking past. You just don't get that at other grounds. And he actually said that as a playing member, where he comes across generally the younger members, he says they're great, but he says there's a noticeable difference in atmosphere when you go to the long room and you go into the pavilion during a test match to other MCC events, which I thought was quite interesting. We've got a question on this more generally, and I think it is worth addressing. It's from David, who says, really enjoying the podcast this summer. Keep up the good work. I also particularly enjoyed Phil's attempts at sounding impartial on the Surrey comms yesterday. Thought he just about managed it as Essex got over the line. By the way, if you've not seen that Surrey-Essex finish, definitely go and seek it out on Twitter. Phil and Joe were on commentary for the final. Extraordinary moment. My question is less about the last day of the Lord's Test, but more about the pretty disheartening and enraging comments made by Sir Andrew Strauss about the controversies that happened yesterday. It's a tad ranty. Apologies in advance. I found it remarkable that in the week of the ICEC report, which has specifically stressed classism within the game, we had one of the foremost faces in the English game making comments directly blaming people who don't normally come to Lords for the booing and heckling of the Australian players. The MCC has now suspended 3 of their own members as a result of what has happened. There are videos flying around of many others calling the Aussies cheats and booing them as they came back into the pavilion at lunch. These are people who do come to Lords, evidenced by the fact that they are MCC members, yet apparently it is the fault of people who had bought tickets for the 5th day and clearly to Strauss had never attended a game in their life. I remember from the 2019 Ashes when there was regular booing for Smith and Warner from both the members' areas and the rest of the ground. It is hardly a new thing. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the reflective blaming. I found it profoundly depressing at a time when the game is at least attempting to be aware of major ongoing issues. Ben, I think that's a fair enough point, and it is not just on Strauss himself, but there was a general vibe that was like Lords is above it, but actually Lords is a very strange venue. I thought the timing of the report and a Lords Test was interesting. I as a non-white guy, I find it impressive for an event in London to be that white, especially cricket, where cricket fans, there's a good 30% of people who play cricket in and around London are not white, yet that is not reflected by the demographic at Lords. I thought it was a very, very bad moment for the MCC and Lords, given the extra scrutiny on the weirdness that this ground gets to have 2 tests. I think things like this should come under scrutiny in the next few years. Why does Lords, that has the least representative crowds in England, why do they get more tests than anyone else? I think moments like this, I think, will mean that there'll be even more scrutiny on that than there was before the Test match.
Yeah, absolutely echo everything you said and that the email has said, and yeah, it's just so disheartening from Strauss, because you should want people to take it, like Lords should almost be giving out cheaper tickets to people in the surrounding areas who maybe might not ordinarily come to Test cricket, or who are at cricket clubs who are real fans who are shout out the game by how much it costs, and then to turn around and basically say, actually, we don't really want your kind here, essentially, is it's very, very bad. And yes, a week where loads and loads of things were combined together. And I think also that depending on how the public conversation or general perception goes, it's not out of the question that Lords, I guess they've announced venues for the next few years, but that becomes more and more of a question: should Lords have 2 tests? Yeah, and also there are so many good grounds that just don't get the tests sometimes, right? And we should want to be playing like cricket. We should want to be playing cricket spread as far in the country, and also because the Oval gets tests where you have 3 tests in one city and then like 3 or 4 for the whole rest of the country.
And I think there's a one men's Ashes series coming up later in the decade where there's not a single Northern test. Anyway, all of our Ashes moments of the week are brought to you by our dapper partners, Charles Tyrwhitt, the British menswear brand. Know a thing or two about looking sharp, so whether you're heading off to the cricket, going to the beach, or even working from the office, they have looks for every dress code. For 20% off, shop online at charlestyrwhitt.com and use the promo code Wisden23 at checkout. Ben, I'm going to pick out the moment of the test as the Pat Cummins ball to Harry Brook. I thought it was really similar to his ball to get rid of Root in 2019 at Old Trafford, and had a similarly deflating feel from an English perspective, because obviously England fight back to get in the test match, but this is the guy who by the way still averages about 75 in test cricket. And Cummins just does what he so often does against England, and that is the kind of a Australia able to be that little bit more penetrative with the ball when it's helping them compared to England, and I think that showed it.
Yeah, and I mean, you could almost pick any of the balls from that little 4 test, or well, not the Crawley one, but the other 2 wickets in that as well. Like the Root ball was also absolutely extraordinary. In a test that was defined by the bouncer, really, that was probably the best bouncer in the whole game, I guess. Like Root properly contorted, not able to get out of the way. And then the Pope one was also just like
quite a good ball as well.
Yeah, and in terms of just like aesthetically dramatic, that would have been the one I picked out, albeit he's the least of the 3 bats, I guess. But yeah, and that was what won Australia the game, not just that passage, but that their bowlers they bowled better than England. That was the most key thing in the game, and that was the passage where that was most clearly highlighted. And yeah, they had 2 champion bowlers doing what champion bowlers do at clutch moments, and that was absolutely vital.
Mel, we mentioned it, but we've not specifically addressed it. Nathan Lyon is almost certainly out of the entire series.
Well, he's definitely
out.
He's out. He's going home.
A huge blow. Obviously, so much was made going into the game that was his 100th consecutive Test match, the first bowler in the history game to do that. Australia turned to him in every possible setting in the world. He started the series brilliantly at Edgbaston. Just how much of a blow will that be? And how much pressure is it they're going to be on young Todd Murphy, who's made a brilliant start to his career, but he's inexperienced, and he's coming against a lineup who are going to take him on. Yeah,
talking about this test just shows you how extraordinary it is that we haven't yet even once mentioned the sight of Nathan Lyon hopping down the steps of the pavilion and going out to bat. That was just absolutely incredible, crazy, but incredible. In the end, those 15 runs, they weren't the difference, but
I think they made a difference, by the way.
They did make a difference.
In terms of the mentality of the end. So England lose by 43. If it's 28, you're a lot more nervous. If Stokes falls when there's 55 to win rather than 70, the whole feeling is very, very different. So I think those 15 runs did actually make a difference, even though that wasn't the winning margin.
Exactly. Look, he was absolutely shattered, because the one, even though he was approaching 500 wickets as well, the 100 consecutive games actually meant a lot more to him, because it was unique. And he said to me, "You'll never do it again." That's the thing. It's that you can only do that once. So that he absolutely shattered, and it is very sad for him personally. Todd Murphy, still very green, very talented, and is the bowler who has been seen as the natural successor for for Nathan Lyon, of course, played those tests in India, took a 7-fer in one as well. So he just doesn't have the experience that Nathan Lyon does. I don't think that's necessarily vital for Australia to win matches, just because their all-round bowling attack is so good. You even saw, Travis Head being able to step in and play a part. So if they've got someone like Todd Murphy who can bowl well, who can chip in with wickets, who can hold up an end, probably more importantly, to keep the other bowlers fresh, especially if a lot of them are backing up from this one, then that is something. But undoubtedly, England will look on it as an opportunity to go, right, okay, let's see if we can get on top of this. Because if they can get on top of him early on, then that obviously, it might change things a little bit for Australia. It may have an effect on Todd Murphy himself. So you expect, of course, England are going to go after him. And it's going to be a great test of him early in his international career to see how he copes with it.
Absolutely. Ben, I almost think, obviously Nathan Lyon is a much, much more accomplished test match bowler than Jack Leach, but actually Australia are better suited to filling that hole when the league spinner goes down than England. With England, it was kind of total panic stations almost. You're looking around as like, who is there? With Australia, they're literally, look at this. There's not even a discussion over who that person is, and that actually there's that backing, I guess, in Murphy. He's got recent test experience. He's done well. That obviously it's going to be a huge challenge for him. But Australia, again, comparing them to England, do have that extra strength and depth that England don't quite have in certain positions.
Yeah, I guess so. Although I think there's probably a bigger, this is no slight on Lyon, it's just on Leach, just how good Lyon is. I think there's probably a bigger gap between Lyon and Murphy than between Leach and Moeen, I think. And they're just different cricketers. England don't have a like for like for Jack Leach.
That's true, yeah.
But it's more the difference, and then the Moeen is retired, I would guess. But there's also just something in the fact that Australia are still producing enough spin bowlers. I know there have been questions over it ever since Warne retired over how people would come through, and Lyon has obviously been brilliant as his successor. But like you look around the English spinning game and who are these specialist spinners, and the fact that English clubs are signing not just Todd Murphy but also Matt Kuhneman and Mitchell Swepson as overseas spinners who are Australians. Like you look at that and think like, hang on, Australia is a country that's not at all dominated by spin, where quicks rule the roost. How are these guys able to still produce like enough spinners to fill out their teams, and we have to go and borrow theirs essentially when it comes to our county season? That will also be, I guess, something of a concern for England, just not just in this series, but kind of going on more generally when we look at the state of spin in the country.
The Sheffield Shield also takes place over, they're not playing all of their Sheffield Shield. If they played all of them on like at the Gabba in September, Australia might have a similar problem with that as well, but they're not. So they're playing it around the country. They often play in dry conditions. Yes, often suits quick bowling, but there are pitches in Adelaide that they're playing on, they might be playing on in March, that actually is quite conducive to at least bringing through spinners.
In Australia, is there as much chat on the schedule in domestic cricket as there is here? Because that's obviously everyone's favourite topic.
Oh, well, they're constantly sort of reducing and lengthening the Big Bash, right, and adding on more playoff games. I don't think Australia have it cracked by any means, I think, right? That's the impression I get, at least.
No, but I also don't think people care as much. So Big Bash is, no, it's genuinely. So, and I think I might have said this on this podcast before. Cricket fans in this country, or people who watch cricket in this country, are cricket fans. They're Surrey fans. They're like, what are you?
Surrey.
You're Surrey, Ben?
I don't have a county team.
Oh, well, you just ruined my argument.
But he doesn't really count because he got into cricket relatively late.
Right, but you ask most people in this country who go to the cricket, maybe not most, but a pretty decent percentage, and they will have a county, right? And in Australia, it just doesn't really work. And no one really cares that much about when the Sheffield Shield's on. It's totally irrelevant to a huge proportion of people who switch on the TV on Boxing Day and watch the cricket because they've always watched the cricket on Boxing Day in Australia. So there will be times, it's like when they split the Sheffield Shield initially, and there was talk about that. If Australia are doing really badly international, then people will talk about the schedule a little bit more. But when Australia's not doing badly and they've just won the World Test Championship, then people, like most people, don't really care. There's not the same thing. The Big Bash is different because it's more about the fact there are too many games and everything. It hasn't been ideal, or it's not ideal to have the season split whatsoever. The One Day Cup in Australia has become just a pre-summer little tournament that very few people pay any attention to domestically, which sounds really harsh, but
it's quite similar to our one here. I mean, the Royal London now gets paid at the same time as 100, and it's essentially kind of a development competition.
I reckon you get more people going to that than you would going to One Day Cup games.
Really?
Well, I went to a final. So a few years back, when first time I went to a Royal London One Day Cup final at Lord's, everyone was going nuts because there were only something like 17,000 people here. And everyone was lamenting the days when it used to be a full house. I had been to one in Australia, and I can't even remember what the sponsor was that year because the sponsor has changed so many times, at the SCG, where at the final, it was free to go in, I'm pretty sure, or might have been like $5 or $10, so £2, £5. There were 2,000 were the official figures, and I went up to an official and said, if there are 2,000 people here, you have counted every steward, every cleaner, every person on the ticket gate, because there ain't 2,000 people here. So that's the difference, right?
That is interesting. That is interesting. Anyway, that is all we have time for today's show. We've got another weekly show coming your way on Wednesday that will be rounding up everything else that's happened in the world of cricket over the last week, which there's also been a lot of that, by the way. And then, kind of unbelievably, the next Test match starts on Thursday. So in 3 days' time, at the time of recording, we'll be approaching lunch on day one at Headingley. Cheers for your time, Mel. Hope you recover for Headingley. Cheers, Ben. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We'll be back soon.
Hi, I'm Kumar Sangakkara, and I'm speaking to you from the Kia Oval. Hello to all parents of young cricket fans. If you are 11 to 16 years old, or if you are a parent of an 11 to 16-year-old, then this message is for you. As part of the partnership between Surrey County Cricket Club and Kia, this amazing opportunity has been created to motivate and excite you, cricket's next generation. This is your chance as a young cricketer to play here on the hallowed green of the Kia Oval, where I spent some great years playing for Surrey in the sport that I love so much. You could be here at a coaching session with me on Saturday, September the 23rd, before playing out there on the field, courtesy of Kia, who have sponsored this club and ground for over a decade. Cricket has been a huge part of my life since I was a little boy, from the age of about 11 or 12, and I know what an opportunity like this would have meant to me. If you want the chance to be part of this, all you need to do is apply, and we might see each other in September.